459er taxi, runway 30, wind 240 at 8, altimeter 2992. Sabre 459er, runway 30, cleared for takeoff. Well, my name is Robert Scott. I was an air traffic controller with the FAA here in the U.S. for 24 years. I was stationed at different places, mostly small and regional airports, but it had to be big enough to have a tower. You know, I always loved aviation. Once I got to air traffic control school in Oklahoma, I just thought, I love this. This is great. This is practically better than being a pilot. So I've always loved air traffic very much.
My job, or my AFSC in the Air Force, which is a 303X1, was an air traffic control radar specialist. And what I did is I installed and maintained air traffic control radar systems. So what radar is a system in which you can determine the speed and the range of aircraft. And the way that is done specifically is an electromagnetic pulse is fired from a very directional antenna out to an area that you want to scan, okay? And at some point it will encounter presumably an aircraft, and when it does that, a certain part of that signal will be reflected back. Okay, so as that signal is coming back, what happens is the radar is internally timing how long it takes that pulse to come back. And by that pulse, using a Doppler effect, it can tell exactly how far away that aircraft is, and by continuing to fire these pulses and get continuous reflections from it, by the rate of Doppler change that those signals come back, we can actually gauge the speed of that aircraft. Some of the things that I witnessed that were very interesting about radar is that we would be able to track aircraft all the way down to the ground, and I do mean all the way down to the ground at distances of around 100 miles. And now that I know the calculation curvature, 100 miles is 6,666 feet of curvature, of drop. That is literally impossible because radar works at microwave frequencies, 2 to 6 gigahertz or even higher, anywhere in the microwave spectrum, and it is absolutely reliant on it being line of sight. Meaning, if you can't see it, it don't work. When you take into consideration that we're able to track aircraft from, you know, whatever altitude they're coming in at, all the way down to the ground at a target 100 miles away, and knowing that that target should be 6,000 plus foot below the curvature, that kind of eliminates the ball model.
Well, you know, in air traffic control, they have two different types of radar. There's a short range, but airport-based radar goes out to 60 miles. And then for the long flights and high altitude and off coast, it can go out to, it's en route radar, and it can be 200 miles. So they can detect targets 200 miles away. So in radar, the point is it has to be able to have a direct line to the airplane. So with regards to the shape of the Earth, I never thought about it as I worked for 24 years. You didn't say, wait a minute, I think that target is too low for me to see at that distance. Nobody ever even thinks about that. But in reality, now knowing what must be if we live on a ball, the fact is that at even just 180 miles, any airplane below 26,000 feet, if the radar can see it, the Earth is not a ball, period. End of story. And does that happen very often? 1,000 times plus a day. 1,000 times plus a day, somebody calls up, somebody comes from offshore. There's a whole class of aircraft that are not pressurized. They can't fly above 11,000 feet. The pilot will pass out. So they operate at and below 10,000 feet no matter what. And no matter what the weather is, they just can't operate up there. And there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these airplanes still operating all the time. And so they'd be coming in at 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet from like Bermuda or beyond and say 180 miles from Miami. And I said, Roger. And every time they do that, they prove the Earth is flat. And they don't know it. But it's absolute undeniable proof. 26,000. And at 200 miles, 29,000. I mean, there's a lot of commercial flights are never at 29,000 coming in from 200 miles out. So, over and over again.
Microwave technology, and this is something that I worked on with a company called Western Telecommunications. And with this job, what I was a field RF engineer. And I did the field engineering and all the testing for these long, great big, huge 10,000 channel microwave relay stations. I remember that we built a lot of sites across Kansas, the state of Kansas, which is very famous for being flat as a pancake, right? Well, not only Kansas, but Nebraska and Iowa as well. So while we were building these sites across Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, the distance in between each one of these sites was approximately 40 to 60 miles, depending on the terrain. And there were occasions when we would have to do line equalizations, and we would have to diagnose a problem to find out why we were getting an unevenness in the spectrum of microwave signal, okay? So in order to do that, what we would do is we would bypass like one of the hops, and we would go from one, and instead of going from here to here, we would go down to this one, shoot from this one to this one, and sometimes we would even go, you know, 2 sites away, right? And actually there were times when we actually did 3 sites. So if you have a 40 to 60, you know, you can get very close to 200 miles on some of those hops. And when we did that, and we would establish our communications, never thinking at all about the curvature of the Earth, we were simply looking for line equalization. But the point is that we had established a connection with a site that was 2 to 3 hops down the line, which represents a distance of nearly 200 miles, anywhere from 100 to 200 miles. And the curvature calculations are immense for 200 miles, and absolutely impossible, especially going across Kansas or Nebraska. And when I look at that in retrospect as a flat earther and understanding the curvature, and knowing also that we were dealing with 6 gigahertz microwave, there is no way at all that these signals could have possibly propagated, but they did. And that was something that, you know, for me personally, was a huge piece of evidence.
The other thing is that for 24 years I gave clearances to aircraft. We read the charts. You have to be familiar with every detail of any airway in your airspace. And that's 60 miles around. And you have to memorize all these radials and everything. And so we looked at these charts regularly. We had low altitude charts and high altitude charts, and we looked at where was what. You know, we studied these things because we would have aircraft call us from those positions. And the thing about all air navigation charts is they're flat. There's nothing on it that says not corrected for curvature. I mean, I never gave a clearance that had anything to do with curvature or adjustment for rotation. No pilot in the history of aviation has even given that a second thought. Nothing adjusts for it. Nothing is ever built to adjust for it. There's no curvature adjustment. There is no spin adjustment. And even in radar, you could put a guy on a vector at 180 degrees, you know, fly heading 180. He could be on that vector for 100 miles. And all the time the Earth is spinning out from under him. It makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. So I never figured this stuff out until I began to research flat Earth.
When you plot a trip, it's done on a Jeppesen map, which is essentially a flat Earth azimuthal equidistant type of map. There are pilots that will insist that you do spherical calculations, but you don't. You do them based on a latitude and longitude system. That's how you derive your, you know, where you're going to go, where you're coming from, where you're going to. And it's all done based on a flat map.